My name is Hans Ulrich Obrist. I'm the artistic director of the Serpentine Galleries, and we are here at the exhibition of Hreinn Fridfinnsson, the visionary Icelandic artist who, for more than 50 years, has created an extraordinary oeuvre of extremely emotional conceptualism, full of stories, and in a way has also created very open artworks. Olafur Eliasson told me about the amazing architecture connection of Fridfinnsson. The Inside Out house is an iconic piece from 1974. When I asked Fridfinnsson about the genesis of this piece, he told me that it actually had to do with a story. And it's the story of a person who decided to build a new house for themselves. The idea was that in this house everything would be turned inside out. The trigger for it was this idea of wallpaper, because it was an early arrival of wallpaper in Iceland. The wallpaper had to be outside and not inside. Everything had to be outside what is usually inside. It's about showing this wallpaper to the world, about letting the world participate. Stories, narratives are very important, and that's also why actually the pieces are very often accompanied by photo presentations. Ever since he began working 50 years ago, or more than 50 years ago, he was very aware of the idea of a responsible use of resources. Here we have the work of an artist who never wasted resources, who never basically produced big objects. He was always doubtful if actually we would have to add more objects to the world. This focus on time, the focus on non-adding objects, inspired a whole generation of artists. Many artists in the early 90s looked at Fridfinnsson's work, and that has to do with an exhibition actually of his work at Le Magasin de Grenoble, which at that time was an amazing laboratory of exhibition making. In the late 80s, early 90s, the Magasin in Grenoble was one of the most experimental places in Europe, and Fridfinnsson had a show there. And a lot of the younger artists came in contact with the work there. In a retrospective like here, it becomes very obvious that the work has a lot to do with landscapes. It's portraits of landscapes, very often texts, stories, accompanied by photography. There is a reluctance, I would say, in his work of adding objects. There is a reluctance of using resources. He's an artist who is extremely responsible in terms of actually the few resources he uses. So we can say he's also, in that sense, very early on, aware of environmental concerns. He's aware of this idea that we should never waste resources. When we did the retrospective of the Serpentine Gallery, it was a quite conceptual show, but it was also very, very emotional. And it was actually really interesting how many people who would usually not necessarily visit the contemporary art exhibition not only came to see the show, but related to the work. I think it's a kind of a very emotional conceptualism. Hreinn has been living for many, many years in exile. He lives in Amsterdam. Of course, that's also very important because the Stedelijk has been a very experimental museum. In the 60s, in the 70s, it was this amazing interdisciplinary institution. The memory of Iceland never went away. The stories of Iceland never went away. The Miami-based novelist Edvige Danticat, who is one of the great storytellers and great writers of our time, Edvige Danticat once says that it has often to do with childhood. When we receive a story as a child, it's something which no one can ever take away from us. It's in that sense more powerful, as Fridfinnsson would say, as any object. The stories of Iceland from Hreinn's childhood continue to play a very important role. For the viewer, of course, create this possibility of a real connection through his work to Iceland. And when we did the show in London, it prompted many, many visitors to read more Icelandic literature. Marcel Duchamp is important for Hreinn. He created, of course, an homage also to Marcel Duchamp. The whole idea of the ready-made is very much a connecting element in the exhibition, because they're not only the ready-mades, but they're also the altered ready-mades. Extraordinary boxes where Wright would actually use fluorescent paper. By inserting this in the inside, it completely changes the inside and the outside. One thing which came to my mind is the connection to Lina Bobardi. Lina Bobardi always had the insides on the outside. And if you think about Lina's house in Sao Paulo with the blur of inside and outside, that's also something we have in Wright's work. In these different houses he created. Inside-outside house, I mentioned from 1974, but then also not to forget the extraordinary second house, which he did with Caspar Koenig and Bussmann in Münster for the Münster Sculpture Project, where he created a completely open house where the rods were actually mirroring. The outside came in because it was all open, but also the idea of the ready-made and the altered ready-made, the augmented. It's almost augmented reality. The augmented ready-mades. One early contact with Wright was also through our project Do It. When I started Do It with Lavier and Boltanski, we invited artists to contribute with instructions. And then the viewer or the visitor can actually do the work. I collect personal secrets. Please send me yours. I look forward to learning them and will keep them carefully. So every visitor is invited to send Wright their secrets. A lot of these works by Wright have actually to do with such open instructions. As he told me in a conversation, it's about giving a very basic idea to somebody else and trusting the outcome. Your collaborator's occupation will influence the outcome. If that person happens to be an artist, then it would be a particular kind of work. Some of these photographs are not taken by him. They are taken by someone else, but he has given instructions. Wright arranges photographs, often in geometric patterns, and I was always wondering what is the connection to the historic avant-garde of the 20th century. Wright explained that a work like Principle and Temptation is a photographic work that actually has the structure of a golden rectangle. When divided into progressively smaller squares, the resulting radius or radii, the so-called golden spiral, appears, and that corresponds to the Fibonacci sequence of numbers. Wright says that it's not a geometric abstraction designed by him, but it's actually a collaboration with abstract principles, with formulas who help him to do the work. Geometric abstraction really was Wright's first big love in the 50s, and I think it never went away. This idea of Michel Serres, of the quasi-object, because the object has never completely gone away. The object keeps coming back, sparsely, rarely, but it's coming back. But it's always surrounded by doubt. So if you think about the house from 74, it's not really about the object. It's a trigger, a trigger for stories, a trigger for conversations. And even if he uses objects, they are never monolithic. They are never heavy. They are never using a lot of resources. They're always highly responsible in terms of not wasting any resource. Very importantly, they are not about occupying space, which is something where it's actually connected to Felix González Torres. When Felix always said that art shouldn't occupy space, it should liberate space. One of the things which has played such an important role is the question of time. When I started as a student in the late 80s to visit artists, and I began to meet the artists of my generation, there was a big influence of Wright because of the emphasis on time, which was not so often used as a medium in art history. It's something Rauschenberg pointed out. Rauschenberg always said it's important to think about time, not only about space. And if you think about Wright's works, like 7 Times from 72, or After a While from 76, these are works where time, in a way, is a medium. I asked Wright to explain to me time. He said it's something that recurs a lot in various ways, sometimes in a very straightforward sense, and sometimes in a more complex form. My interest in the essence of time is serious, but my dealing with time is not knowledge-based. It's more exploratory and it's feeling based. We can see it in After a While. It's a diptych. On the left there is a photo of the work table of Wright on which lies a piece of paper with something written on it. The image on the right is a tiny little piece of paper with again a sentence written on it. It's the paper itself, which you saw on the photograph on the left, transported out of the photographic image. So you can say that it's actually a movement time work. It invites us to this exploratory and feeling-based notion of time.